The rain hit the windshield like it was trying to get in. Denise Whitfield sat in her car outside the house she grew up in, engine off, hands shaking, a folded piece of paper pressed flat against her chest like it could stop her heart from cracking open. 20 minutes earlier, her mother had looked her dead in the eye, in front of her own sister, and said the words that would end one version of Denise's life and begin another. "You're too broke to stay in this house. I need you gone by the weekend." Denise hadn't screamed. She hadn't cried, not right away. She had simply reached into her bag, pulled out the paper and set it on the kitchen table without a word. Her mother's face had gone the colour of old paper itself, because what Denise had placed on that table wasn't a bill or a resignation letter or an apology. It was the deed to the house, and it had her name on it. Not her mother's, hers. If you're watching this and stories like this one hit something deep in you, do us a favour before we go any further. Hit that subscribe button, tap like, and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from tonight. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it, and it lets us know we're not just telling a story into the void. Now let's go back. Let's go back to how a 52-year-old woman ended up sitting in a rain-soaked car, holding proof that the house she'd been raised to believe would never be hers already was. Denise had not always been the strong one. Growing up in that house on Chestnut Row, she had been the quiet one, the one who did the dishes without being asked, who brought home report cards nobody looked at because they were too busy praising her older brother Marcus for merely showing up. Her mother, Loretta, was a woman built from difficulty. Loretta had raised 3 children mostly alone after their father left when Denise was 8, and there was a hardness in her that never fully softened, even in the years when things got easier. Loretta loved her children in her way. But love in that house had always come with conditions, and the conditions had always seemed to favour Marcus. Marcus, who borrowed money and never paid it back. Marcus, who wrecked 2 cars and got a third. Marcus, who at 49 years old still lived 2 streets over and dropped by whenever he needed something, and Loretta always found a way to give it to him, even when there wasn't much to give. Denise had left home at 19, put herself through community college, working double shifts at a diner, and built a modest but steady life for herself 2 hours away, in a small rental apartment that never quite felt like enough, but was hers. She sent money home more times than she could count, not because anyone demanded it, but because that's who she was. She'd wire $200 when the electricity was about to be shut off. She'd drive 4 hours on a weekend to fix a leaking roof herself because contractors were too expensive. Nobody asked her to keep a ledger of it, and she never did. But if she had, the numbers would have told a story her mother didn't want to hear. 3 years ago, everything shifted. Loretta had a stroke, a small one, the kind that leaves you standing but shaken, unsteady on your feet, and unsteady in your mind about how much time you might have left. It was Denise who dropped everything. It was Denise who took unpaid leave from her job, who moved back into that house on Chestnut Row for what was supposed to be 6 weeks and became 6 months. It was Denise who sat in hospital waiting rooms while Marcus sent a single text asking if their mother was okay, then didn't visit for 11 days. And it was during that fragile, frightening stretch of time that Loretta, scared and vulnerable in a way Denise had never seen before, asked her daughter to do something that would later detonate the entire family. "I need this house protected," Loretta had said one evening, her voice thinner than Denise remembered it ever being. "If something happens to me, I don't want Marcus selling this place out from under everybody within a month. You're the only one with sense in this family, Denise. I want your name on the deed, just to protect it." Just in case, Denise had hesitated. She remembered that hesitation clearly, remembered how her mother had gripped her hand, how there had been real fear in her eyes, not manipulation, not scheming, just an old woman terrified of losing control of the one solid thing she had left in the world. So Denise had agreed. They went to a lawyer together. The paperwork was drawn up cleanly, legally, with Loretta present, cognizant and insistent. The deed was transferred fully into Denise's name, not held jointly, not placed in some trust with strings attached, but transferred outright at Loretta's own request and her own signature. At the time, it had felt like an act of trust. Denise had no idea it would one day feel like a landmine buried quietly beneath her own family's feet. Waiting. For 2 years, nothing about daily life in that house changed. Loretta recovered enough to move around on her own, regained most of her sharpness, and the subject of the deed simply never came up again. Denise assumed her mother had either forgotten the specifics or trusted that it didn't matter, since Denise had no intention of ever using that piece of paper against her. She kept paying utility bills. She kept covering property tax shortfalls. She kept driving those 4 hours on weekends. The deed sat in a drawer forgotten until 3 weeks ago when Marcus came back into the picture with a plan that would drag it violently back into the light. Marcus had a business idea, or rather Marcus had a friend with a business idea, and Marcus needed capital, and the fastest, most obvious source of capital in his mind was the house. He started coming around more, being sweeter to Loretta than he had been in years, bringing her flowers, taking her to church on Sundays, sitting with her in the evenings the way Denise used to before she moved back to her own apartment once things had stabilized. Loretta, starved for that kind of attention from her golden child, softened in a way that alarmed her other daughter, Denise's younger sister Angela, who watched it happen with growing unease and eventually called Denise to warn her. "He's up to something," Angela said over the phone one night. "He keeps asking Mama about the house, about who owns what, about whether she could still sell it if she wanted to." Denise felt something cold settle in her stomach. "She knows I have the deed. She was there. She signed it herself." "I don't think she remembers it the way you remember it," Angela said quietly. "Or I don't think she wants to." That single sentence would prove to be the most important warning Denise received, and she almost didn't take it seriously enough. Because 2 weeks later, Marcus convinced Loretta to look into refinancing the house, to pull out a loan against its value to fund his business venture. And it was only when the mortgage company called Loretta directly to confirm details that the truth came crashing down on her. The house wasn't hers to refinance. It hadn't been hers on paper for 3 years. And instead of remembering the fear that had driven her to make that decision, instead of remembering her own signature, her own request, Loretta remembered only the sting of realizing her son's plan couldn't move forward, and someone needed to be blamed for that. She chose Denise. If this story is already pulling something out of you, if you've ever given everything to a family that didn't give it back the same way, go ahead and drop a comment right now telling us how this is making you feel. We read every single one, and knowing this story is reaching people the way it's meant to means more than you know. Now back to that kitchen. 3 weeks before the rain, before the deed hit the table, when everything was still simmering instead of boiling over. Denise had driven up on a Sunday the way she always did, expecting the usual routine of grocery runs and small talk and half-watched television. Instead, she walked into a kitchen thick with tension, Marcus leaning against the counter with his arms crossed and a look on his face she hadn't seen since childhood. The look he used to get right before he blamed her for something he'd done. Loretta was seated at the table, and she didn't get up when Denise walked in, didn't offer the small smile she usually did. "Sit down," Loretta said. Not a request. Denise sat, slowly, feeling the temperature of the room. "What's going on? You want to explain?" Loretta said. "Why my own house doesn't belong to me anymore?" The question landed like a slap, not because it was cruel, but because of how casually her mother phrased it, as though Denise had done something sneaky, something behind her back rather than exactly what her mother had asked of her, in a lawyer's office with full paperwork and full understanding. Denise felt the ground shift beneath her. "Mama, you know why? You asked me to. You were scared after the stroke. You didn't want Marcus selling the house if something happened to you. You said." "I don't remember saying all that," Loretta cut in, and there was something in her voice, something performative, something that didn't quite match the confusion of someone who genuinely forgot. It matched, instead, the tone of someone who had decided, consciously or not, to forget. Marcus spoke up then, and his voice carried the false gentleness of a man who has already decided he's the victim in a situation he created. Denise, come on, you took advantage of Mama when she was sick and scared. Everybody knows that's messed up. Something in Denise went very still, not numb. Still, the way water goes, still right before it starts to boil. I took advantage of her, she repeated slowly. The same week I was sleeping in a hospital chair while you sent one text message in 11 days. Don't turn this around, Marcus snapped. I'm not turning anything around. I'm telling you the truth, and you don't like the truth because it doesn't fit the story you're building. Loretta slammed her hand on the table, and the sound silenced the room. I am still your mother, and this is still my house, whether some piece of paper says different or not. And if you're going to sit in my kitchen disrespecting your brother, maybe you shouldn't be sitting in my kitchen at all. That was the first crack, not the final blow. That would come 3 weeks later, in the rain. But the first visible fracture in a wall Denise had spent her entire life building around the idea that her mother, despite everything, loved her fairly. Denise left that Sunday early, said nothing else, drove 2 hours home with her hands tight on the wheel and told herself it would blow over. Families argued. Money made people ugly. It would pass. It did not pass. It got worse. Over the following weeks, Denise learned, mostly through Angela, that Marcus had brought in a lawyer of his own, that he was exploring whether the deed transfer could be challenged on grounds of undue influence, whether their mother's post-stroke vulnerability could be used to argue she hadn't been of sound enough mind to sign away her house, even though every doctor's note from that period confirmed her full cognitive competence. It was a desperate, legal long shot, and everyone who understood the paperwork knew it. But that didn't stop Marcus from using it as ammunition in the far more effective, far crueler campaign he ran in parallel, turning Loretta against her own daughter, day by day, visit by visit, flower by flower, until the version of events in Loretta's mind bore almost no resemblance to what had actually happened. By the time Denise received the phone call telling her to come to the house that Friday evening, she already had a sick feeling about what was coming. She just didn't expect it to arrive so bluntly, so publicly, with Angela standing right there as a witness, as if her mother wanted an audience for what she was about to do. "You're too broke to stay in this house," Loretta had said, the words clipped and rehearsed in a way that told Denise someone had helped her practice them. "I need you gone by the weekend." The word broke was the strangest part, the part that stung longest, because Denise wasn't broke. She had a steady job, a modest savings account, a life that, while not extravagant, was entirely her own and entirely stable. The insult wasn't really about money, it was about power. It was Loretta trying to reduce her daughter to something small enough to discard, and it was Marcus's fingerprints all over the choice of words, because broke was the exact insult Marcus had used about Denise for years, jealous of a stability he had never managed to build for himself. Denise didn't argue in that moment. She didn't defend herself. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out the folded copy of the deed she had carried with her for weeks without fully understanding why, some instinct telling her she might need it, and laid it on the table. "This is my house, Mama," she said quietly. "You gave it to me. You asked me to protect it. I'm not going anywhere." It was nearly midnight by the time Angela finally stood. For a long moment, neither sister spoke. The rain tapped softly against the apartment windows, quieter now than the storm Denise had driven through, but somehow heavier. Angela crossed the room without a word, disappeared into the hallway, and returned carrying an old canvas tote bag. It looked ordinary enough, faded at the corners, the kind of bag someone used for groceries or library books. But the way she held it, with both hands, carefully, almost reluctantly, made Denise's tighten. Angela set it gently on the coffee table. "I've been staring at this bag every day for 2 weeks, she whispered. "Every morning I tell myself, today's the day I'll do something about it. Every night I lose my nerve." She reached inside and pulled out a thick manila envelope. The edges were bent from being handled too many times. Denise noticed Angela's fingers trembling as she slid the documents onto the table. "There," Angela said quietly. "Everything I found." Denise leaned forward. The first page carried the logo of the lending company. Below it, in bold letters, was loan application, preliminary review. The property address made her stomach clench. Her mother's house. No, not Loretta's house. Her house. The house her grandfather had legally transferred into her name years earlier. She flipped the page. Borrower, Loretta Whitfield. Requested amount, $185,000. Purpose, home equity renovation. Denise barely breathed as she scanned farther down. Then she saw it, the signature. Loretta Whitfield. At first glance, it looked convincing, but Denise had watched her mother sign birthday cards, insurance forms, and church documents for nearly 40 years. This wasn't Loretta's handwriting. The loops were wrong. The pressure was uneven. Even the way the final D curled looked forced. She looked up slowly. He actually forged it, Angela nodded. I compared it with Mama's driver's license and her pension paperwork. It isn't even close. Denise turned another page. Attached behind the application was a photocopy of Loretta's driver's license, a property tax statement, copies of utility bills. Someone hadn't acted on impulse. Someone had planned this. Page after page revealed preparation. Marcus had gathered documents, copied identification, filled out financial disclosures, estimated renovation costs that didn't exist, even fake contractor estimates, every piece designed to convince the lender that the loan was legitimate. This took time, Denise murmured. Angela gave a bitter laugh. Exactly. This wasn't desperation. No. This was a plan. Angela nodded again. A very careful one. Denise leaned back against the couch. Everything suddenly looked different. Marcus hadn't exploded because Denise owned the house. He'd exploded because he had built an entire financial scheme around everyone believing she didn't. Every accusation, every family argument, every tear Loretta had cried, every cruel word Denise had endured. And it hadn't been random. It had all served one purpose. If Loretta believed Denise had somehow stolen the house, she'd never question why Marcus wanted her signature so badly. She would defend him, fight for him, distrust Denise exactly as he needed. Denise closed her eyes. He sacrificed me. Angela looked at her. What? He sacrificed me to protect himself. The words sounded strangely calm, not angry, not even surprised, just painfully true. Marcus had offered his own sister as the villain because it was easier than admitting he was trying to mortgage property that didn't belong to him. The realization hurt far more than the forged signature. Fraud was a crime. Betrayal was personal. Angela reached across the table and squeezed Denise's hand. I'm sorry? Denise shook her head slowly. No. She opened the folder again. I'm done being sorry for things I didn't do. The sentence hung in the room. Quiet. Firm. Different. Angela noticed it immediately. So what now? Denise looked down at the papers one last time before sliding every document carefully back into the envelope. Then she zipped the canvas bag shut. For the first time all night, the shaking in her hands had stopped. We tell Mama. Angela frowned. You heard what I said. She won't believe us. Maybe not. She'll think Marcus is being framed. Maybe. She might even throw us both out. Denise stood. But she deserves the truth. Angela searched her sister's face. What if the truth isn't enough? Denise stared toward the rain-soaked window. Then we'll have to prove it. Neither sister realized that at that exact moment, Marcus was sitting in his own living room, smiling as he ignored 3 missed calls from the bank. He believed the danger had already passed. He believed Denise had been driven away for good. He believed the paperwork had disappeared forever. He had no idea it was sitting inside an old canvas bag only a few feet away from 2 women who were finally beginning to understand exactly what he had done. And by sunrise, one of them would make a phone call that would set in motion a chain of events Marcus never saw coming. That night marked the moment the story stopped being about a mother and daughter arguing over a house and became something closer to an unraveling conspiracy, one built slowly, deliberately, out of a son's greed and a mother's fear of losing what little control old age had left her. And Denise now had a choice in front of her that felt heavier than anything the deed itself had ever represented. Expose her brother and risk shattering whatever fragile relationship remained between her mother and Marcus. Or stay silent, protect the peace and let Marcus's fraud potentially resurface again in some other form, aimed at a mother too trusting and too proud to see it coming a second time. She chose to expose it, not out of anger, out of love, not the soft, sentimental kind people write greeting cards about, not the easy kind that smiles through discomfort just to keep everyone happy. The stubborn, unglamorous kind of love that accepts being misunderstood if it means protecting someone from a truth they cannot yet bear to see. Denise knew exactly what confronting Marcus would cost. She knew her mother might never forgive her. She knew relatives would whisper that she was tearing the family apart over money. She knew Marcus would paint himself as the victim before the first conversation even began. But she also knew something far more important. Silence had already nearly destroyed them. If she walked away now, Marcus would learn that manipulation worked. He would simply wait for another opportunity, another signature, another crisis, another moment when Loretta was scared enough to trust the wrong person again. Denise couldn't live with that. Loving her mother no longer meant protecting her feelings. It meant protecting her future. The following Tuesday arrived, grey and quiet, with the kind of heavy sky that made the house feel smaller than it really was. Angela came early, carrying a worn leather folder tucked carefully beneath her arm. Denise arrived minutes later, parking in the same driveway she had left only days before, with tears burning behind her eyes. This time, she wasn't carrying heartbreak. She was carrying proof. Marcus wasn't home. Angela had made sure of that before calling everyone together. Loretta waited in the kitchen, my little coffee growing cold beside her untouched mug, looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. 3 weeks of constant tension had settled into the lines around her eyes. She looked like someone desperate for certainty, even if the certainty hurt. Nobody spoke immediately. Angela quietly placed the leather folder on the table. Denise laid the original deed beside it. Slowly, almost ceremonially, Angela removed copies of the forged loan application, the bank correspondence, the handwriting comparison, and the investigator's report. One sheet after another formed a silent timeline across the old wooden table. Loretta frowned. "What is all this?" Denise swallowed hard. "Mama, we need you to look at something." Loretta adjusted her reading glasses and reached for the first document. Her eyes moved carefully across every line, every paragraph, every signature box. Halfway through the second page, her breathing changed. She picked up the loan application. Her fingers stopped. She stared at the signature for so long that Denise wondered if time itself had paused. Finally, Loretta lifted one trembling finger and traced the familiar curve of the name. "This?" she whispered. Her voice barely existed. "This is my signature." No one answered. "But," she continued, confusion giving way to fear, "I never signed this." The words echoed through the kitchen with devastating simplicity. "No, Mama!" Denise said quietly. "You didn't." Silence settled over the room. Not awkward silence, not peaceful silence. The kind of silence that arrives when an entire version of reality begins collapsing faster than the mind can rebuild it. Denise watched her mother's expression change in slow, painful stages. Confusion, disbelief, recognition, then guilt. Real, crushing guilt. Something broke behind Loretta's eyes. Not memory, not pride, but certainty. For 3 weeks she had defended Marcus with everything she had. She had accused Denise of betrayal. She had questioned every sacrifice her daughter had ever made. She had chosen her son's version of events because accepting it meant she didn't have to face the terrifying possibility that she had trusted the wrong child. Now the evidence left no room to hide. Tears filled her eyes before she even realized they were falling. "He told me," she whispered. Her voice cracked under the weight of the admission. "He told me you tricked me." Denise didn't interrupt. "He said you took advantage of me while I was sick." Loretta wiped her cheeks with shaking fingers. "He said you convinced me to sign the house over because you wanted to sell it after I died, that you'd been planning this all along." She looked at her daughter, and the shame in her expression was almost unbearable. "I believed him." Another silence. Longer this time. "I believed him because," her words dissolved into tears, "because he's my son." She closed her eyes. "And because I wanted to believe the worst thing wasn't true." Denise leaned forward. "What worst thing?" Loretta finally said the words she had been running from for weeks. "That I had failed." Her shoulders collapsed. "I couldn't bear the thought that I'd been fooled by my own child." She shook her head slowly. "So I convinced myself it had to be you instead." Those words landed harder than any insult Marcus had ever thrown. For a moment, Denise simply stared at her mother. 3 weeks of humiliation, 3 weeks of accusations, 3 weeks of sleeping in a motel because the woman she'd spent years protecting no longer trusted her. Every painful memory rose to the surface, and yet, standing in front of her now wasn't an enemy. It was an elderly woman realizing she had been manipulated by the person she had spent a lifetime trying to protect. Denise reached across the table. She took her mother's trembling hand. "You didn't let anything happen, Mama." Loretta looked up. "You were scared 3 years ago." She nodded weakly. "You made the best decision you could with the information you had." Another tear rolled down Loretta's face. "You trusted me." A pause. "And that wasn't a mistake." Denise squeezed her hand gently. "It was the smartest decision you ever made." Loretta looked down at the deed lying beside the forged documents. "If this house is still ours, it is. If nobody can take it, they can't. If Marcus failed, he failed. He failed because you trusted me." Those words shattered whatever resistance Loretta still carried. She began crying openly. Not elegant tears, not quiet ones, the kind that come from years of guilt, fear, denial, and love colliding all at once. She reached for Denise with both arms. "I'm so sorry." Denise closed her eyes as her mother embraced her. The hug wasn't magical. It didn't erase the motel nights. It didn't erase the cruel words. It didn't erase the moment Loretta had chosen Marcus over her. Some wounds don't disappear because someone apologizes. But forgiveness doesn't begin when the past changes. It begins when the truth finally has room to breathe. If this story is already stirring something inside you, if you've ever had to fight to protect someone who couldn't see you were on their side, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. Stories like this aren't just about family conflict. They're about the difficult choices that define character, the painful truths that eventually set people free, and the courage it takes to stand firm when doing the right thing costs everything. And if you're still here, don't go anywhere, because the hardest confrontation in this story hadn't happened yet. It came 2 days later. Loretta confronted Marcus herself. Denise wasn't there. She didn't want to be. Some conversations belong only to the people who created the damage. Angela later described it as less of an argument and more of an explosion. The shouting could be heard from the front porch. Marcus denied everything. He insisted the loan application had simply been misunderstood. He claimed Loretta had verbally authorized him over the phone to sign the paperwork because she was too ill to travel. He said the bank had made clerical mistakes. He blamed everyone except himself. But lies have one weakness. They collapse when they meet evidence. The bank's records showed no phone authorization, no witness, no recorded consent, no legal documentation allowing Marcus to sign on his mother's behalf. Every excuse unraveled one after another until nothing remained except the truth. For the first time in longer than Denise could remember, Loretta stopped listening to the child she wanted to believe and started believing the evidence that had been sitting in front of her all along. For the first time in years, truth mattered more than comfort. And that decision would change the Whitfield family forever. But the story did not end in triumph. It ended in something far more complicated, far more human. Loretta did not disown Marcus. She could not bring herself to, not fully, not after 50 years of loving a son who had never quite grown into the man she hoped he'd become. Instead, she set boundaries she had never set before, telling Marcus plainly that he would no longer have access to any financial matters concerning the house, that any future contact would be built on honesty or not built at all. It was not the clean, satisfying justice some might have wanted, but it was real, the kind of imperfect resolution that actual families live with, the kind that doesn't erase decades of damage, but at least stops the bleeding. As for Denise, something shifted in her that went beyond the house, beyond the deed, beyond even her mother's belated apology, delivered quietly one evening weeks later, without excuses. Simply the words, "I was wrong and I'm sorry, and I see now what you've always done for this family, even when nobody else did." Denise realized that the paper she had carried in her bag that rainy night had never really been about ownership. It had been about proof, tangible proof, that the years of sacrifice, the missed weekends, the wired money, the hospital chairs had mattered, had built something real, even when no one around her seemed to notice at the time. She kept the house, She let her mother continue living there, rent-free, exactly as before, because that had never been the point. Not once. The point had been dignity, the simple, exhausting right to not be discarded by the people you've spent your whole life showing up for, the moment showing up stopped being convenient for someone else's narrative. Marcus eventually paid back what little money he'd managed to extract before the fraud was caught, working out a slow repayment arrangement with Loretta rather than facing formal legal consequences, a mercy Denise didn't fully agree with but respected as her mother's choice to make, since it was, after everything, still her son and still her heart to protect or not protect as she saw fit. Some wounds, Denise learned, don't heal through punishment. They heal through the slow, uneven work of people choosing again and again to tell the truth even when it costs them something. If there's one thing this story leaves you with, let it be this. The people who show up quietly, who give without keeping score, who protect what matters without ever asking for credit, are often the ones written out of the story until the truth has no choice but to write them back in. If that's you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family for simply being the reliable one, we see you. And we hope this story reminded you that your worth was never up for debate, no matter what anyone said in a kitchen, in the rain, or anywhere else. Before you go, subscribe if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and tell us in the comments the biggest lesson you're taking with you. Because in the end, it was never really about a house, or a deed, or even the money Marcus tried to steal. It was about a daughter who never stopped showing up, and a mother who finally, painfully, learned to see her.